A review, Merriam-Webster's definition, a report that gives someone's opinion about the quality of a book, performance, product, etc. Opinionated videos, subjective articles, we have enough of those. I think we deserve an objective, factual video on the Steam controller, and one that doesn't end right when it's starting to get good. This video might be my final word on the Steam controller, but it won't be the end of this channel. Before we begin, I just want to thank all of you for your support. You've watched all of my videos, even the bad ones. You've left some very nice comments, and some dogshit comments. But most of all, you've made this YouTube thing fun for me. I would also like to talk for a second on the direction I want to take this channel. I think as of right now, I've said everything there is to say about the Steam controller. I've gotten a lot of requests for individual games. Some of you have actually given those games to me, and that's crazy awesome of you guys. But those one game per videos are not what I'd like to do. And honestly, those videos don't need to be made. The Steam controller's been out for about 5 months now, maybe 6, and you, the community, have come up with some insane and clever configurations on your own. You know what the controller is good at, and what it isn't so good at. So this video might be a bit redundant, but I hope it reflects your position on the Steam controller as it stands today. View it as a collection of my thoughts over the past several months, but also a video that I myself might not agree with further down the line. So if you don't want to hear the new format for this channel, go ahead and click here to skip to the meat of the video. No hurt feelings, it's pretty dry stuff, and I'm sure not many of you will care, so I'll try to keep it short. I'm incredibly interested in game design. I'm something of an amateur level designer, and working on some indie games is how I got this controller in the first place. I'm also a big fan of Super Bunny Hop's work. If you're familiar with his videos, I hope you've seen some overlap in mine, although the popular comparison seems to be with sequelitis. Anyway, I feel a connection with Super Bunny Hop's long, thought-out, in-depth discussions of video games, but a slight disconnect with the topics he talks about. That's not to say they're not interesting, but he only touches on some video game subjects I'd really like to get involved with. So like a lot of you, working on the next big video game is a dream of mine, and it's something I was very close to achieving at one point. So I'd like to talk about video game levels, why they're designed the way they are, why this light post was placed here, or why this particular light source was blue, and its neighboring light is orange. I'm sure I'll be wrong about many things, but it'll be a learning experience made public, and one that I'd like to bring you along with me. So think of it kind of like a new journey, just instead of the isolating topic of the Steam controller, I'll be talking about video games. Oh, and also VR. I'm really into VR. The Steam controller has gone through a substantial amount of changes through its development, like all things Valve. The first unveiling of the device was the strangest input method most of us had seen this side of the N64. It looked like an upside-down Xbox 360 controller with 2 large black pads, replacing the traditional joysticks we've grown to hate. The Steam controller was not made to replace your Xbox controller, although for most of us it has. It was made to take your keyboard and mouse games and compact them into a peripheral we could use out in the living room, without those awkward couch tray things others have come up with. The idea of using touchpads for input is surprisingly not unique to the Steam controller. Both the SNES and Genesis saw this with Triax's Turbo Touch 360, but 2 key differences set the Steam controller way ahead of this tech from the 90s. Haptics and customization. Is the Steam controller's D-pad a repeat of design that didn't work in the 90s? So like Valve, Triax set out to create a solution to a problem that most didn't think about too much. As talked about briefly in the last video, D-pads are made of a hard plastic that can cause discomfort for your thumbs during long play sessions. The Genesis controller was especially guilty of this. Triax's solution? A touchpad to replace the D-pad. Like the Steam controller, there was a fairly divided opinion on how effective this approach was, with some thinking it's a pile of garbage that doesn't help you at all, and some believing it was pretty okay for what it was. Users of the Turbo Touch 360 were not able to set a dead zone, so wherever their thumb made contact with the pad, the controller would send the appropriate input to the console. Players had to hover their thumb over the touchpad when they were looking to move their character. This was one of the main complaints about the Turbo Touch, and there's a lot of overlap between this and the Steam controller. But unlike the Triax design, Steam controller users can rest their thumb in the middle of the pad without sending an input. This allows for very quick and mostly accurate inputs to be sent. But this method isn't without its own faults. There's no tactile feedback to the user on where their thumb is on the pad, if the requirement to click is set to off. When the user makes physical contact with the D-pad outside of a set dead zone, they're sending input, and for most, that's hard to get used to. The physical indentions on the Steam controller's D-pad are both too shallow and too deep at the same time. It's difficult for users to get a point of reference similar to a traditional D-pad with a Steam controller. This is a drawback you get when you have a device that attempts to emulate multiple inputs. The workaround? Expand the Steam controller's dead zone. There are several advantages a touch-based system has over a traditional one, however. For one, inputs can be sent slightly faster, although most game systems can limit just how quickly one can spam quarter circle forward X. These inputs can also be sent repeatedly without fatiguing the user's thumbs. There are numerous viewpoints circulating forums and chat windows claiming that the Steam controller's D-pad is more accurate than a traditional one. Whether this is true or not really boils down to personal opinion. Objectively, the Steam controller's D-pad holds the advantage in regards to long-term comfort and providing use for numerous applications. Mini M&M-sized face buttons. It lacks a traditional D-pad, a strangely placed joystick, 2 touchpads, some grippy paddle things on the back. Change scares people. There's so much change going on with Valve's creation, it's actually difficult to compare it to what people are already used to. We can compare joysticks, build quality, and ergonomics, but I think people already have their opinions set about these things. And there are a ton of other videos talking about them, most of which I agree with. Without getting redundant or sounding too opinionated, I've come to like the controller's layout, for the most part. When I first received my controller, I had trouble with the face buttons. I kept hitting B when I wanted A, like the layout was rotated 90 degrees from what I was used to. The joystick needs improvement. There's a bit of a mushy zone near the edges, and a bit of a dead zone in the center that I can't seem to get rid of completely. The shape of the controller is generally focused on providing a comfortable experience using the touchpads. Comfort for joysticks and face buttons be damned. This is fine with me, as the joysticks and the face buttons should be secondary uses at this point. The paddles on the back are connected to the battery cover, a smart move for reducing the cost of manufacturing the device. However, this causes the paddles to trigger as though they were a lever. Think of them like bigger Xbox bumpers. Some like it, some don't. It's all in how you're holding the controller. You shouldn't find yourself needing to exert a lot of force to activate these paddles. A quick press with your ring or pinky finger should do it. Whether you are using them for reloading, jumping, pulling up a touch menu, or closing tabs in your desktop's browser, the rear paddles are a fantastic addition, ones that you'll employ constantly. When you do find a sweet spot for your hands with the controller, it really shines. I can play just about anything using the touchpads for hours, no cramps at all, which is more than I can say about my Xbox controller. The most common question from people who haven't tried the Steam controller is, what do the haptics feel like? The Steam-phrased HD haptics provide tactile response in relation to where your thumb makes contact with the touchpads. The haptic actuators are capable of letting you know what to expect to happen on the screen. Think of it like tiny speakers that are laid out in an array that follow your thumb slide across the pad. Trackball mode will let you feel how far your mouse will travel on the screen. Joystick mode lets you know when you're reaching the maximum input for the virtual stick. The D-pad creates the sensation of a larger but shallow D-pad rocking underneath your thumb. Without haptics, the trackpads would be more akin to a laptop pad, empty, void of any feedback, and a general feeling of inaccuracy. While the topic of overall precision will be debated for as long as the mouse versus gamepad discussion has, there is no denying that once you get the Steam controller to behave in a way that's comfortable for you, it's far better to aim with naturally than a joystick. Games today are excellent at masking just how bad traditional joysticks are. Bullet magnetism, aim assist, aim prediction, all of these things have been carefully developed to create a system that appears flawless to those who are none the wiser. While the Steam controller's mouse emulation won't ever be better than an actual mouse, it does not employ these aim assist crutches, which speaks volumes for what to expect once you've given the device some time. That's about as objective as I can get, really. A large percentage of this topic is going to fall into personal preference, and that's kind of how it should be. If you're going to be using the Steam controller's joystick or face buttons a lot, I think you'll notice some slight discomfort. But if you're using the touchpads more often for movement and actions, you won't want to go back to anything else. Today is a much better day to use the Steam controller. November of last year was filled with bugs, missing features, and a lack of community configurations for the less popular games. While we still don't have a method for editing the controller outside of big picture mode, Valve has been gradually improving the end user experience through updates and bug fixes. Unfortunately, these updates are first available through the Steam beta, which brings instability to the Steam client, and it also brings over other updates from Valve's additional hardware. Some of the description boxes have placeholder text, and some seem to be worded by the programmer who implemented them, leaving the interpretation of the feature up to the user. I'd like to see graphics in this box. Nice, easy to understand diagrams that convey exactly what an anti-dead zone does without needing to read a novel. Finding community configurations is heavily imbalanced. The The most popular configs float to the top, and quantity of users does not always equate to a high quality config. Any changes that are made by a user need to be used for an hour before submitting to the community. This is frustrating when the only change you've made was moving crouch to the right grip. There is not a way to search for a specific user's configurations like in the workshop, so all of you asking for my configurations have to use my outdated collection that gets injected through a third-party client. Sharing configurations could be much easier if Valve were to implement a workshop-like system, allowing users to subscribe, comment suggestions, and view a specific user's work. There have been some minor bugs with touchpad usage, configuration saving incorrectly, and other UI glitches that have, for the most part, been ironed out for the past few months. But with how many features Valve is adding to the controller after launch, this is a stark reminder that what we have now is very much finished hardware running on very much beta software. Like the Steam link, it's quite frustrating to see your Steam client crash, needing to reboot the game and Steam to finish making the changes that you wanted. As mentioned before, all of the configuring is done in big picture mode, which is a great UI when it's being handled by a controller, but an awful one when you're sitting at your desk with a mouse. Valve says they're working on a desktop mode that's coming soon, but we all know how Valve time works. For now, whatever configuration you've set in big picture mode will activate automatically when in the classic desktop view. Most importantly, Valve has shown support for the Steam controller months after launch, indicating that it is very much an alive and thriving piece of hardware that Valve will continue to iterate upon. The issues I've listed here are problematic and daunting for someone looking for a controller that's immediately plug and play. I'm of the belief that things will continue to get better as time goes on, but that's something that won't be seen for many more months. I would bet my bottom dollar, 90% of the users who got their Steam controller for the first time fired up an FPS and immediately compared its out-of-the-box performance to their mouse. I imagine 70% of them were instantly disappointed to some degree. I think 10% of those users who were underwhelmed trashed it and never looked back. The remaining number of users dove into community configurations and dabbled with the daunting overlay. Chances are, you discovered my channel with that Doom video. It's my most popular one, which makes a lot of sense given the context of users' expectations. For the starting months, everyone was still figuring out the best settings for FPS games. Do we lower in-game sensitivity and crank up the slider in big picture mode? What about that gyro thing no one even knew of until Heathrow Q showed us his Metal Gear Solid video? Some shooters will play better than others. Games that were designed for consoles are going to play much better with the Steam controller than Counter-Strike will. Enemies are generally bigger and easier to hit, and the levels don't have much verticality to them when you compare it to older game design. Think of how Quake's levels were laid out, and see just how different they were to something like the single-player campaigns in Call of Duty. Games that are designed with the keyboard and mouse in mind convey challenge through varying enemy placement that's both above and behind you. Meanwhile, a console game like The Division has you plowing through enemies hiding behind cover that's placed on the same horizontal plane. The difficulty in The Division is time to kill. The difficulty in Quake is reflexes and accuracy. And I think that's kind of an apt comparison to a traditional controller. Controllers typically illustrate this image of slower, comfier play, allowing you to kick back and take things casually. Contrast this to a keyboard where the user is upright and focused, ready to react as quickly as possible. This kind of analysis makes me wonder if it's fair to compare something that's essentially an amalgamation of two completely different play methods. Fuck it, we'll do it anyway. FPS games are tough to judge. There are so many different types of shooters: brown and bloom, bloom and brown, bloom and bloom, and so on.
Cities with a giant worm.
Borderlands plays like the Steam controller was made for it. Dual stage triggers allow for quick ADS and is enhanced by the game's built-in snap aiming. X input and mouse inputs can be sent simultaneously, so you're free to use the gamepad template and slam a mouse emulator on the right pad. Doom 3 is a great example too. After some heavy tinkering and getting used to WASD on the left trackpad, your thumbs won't ever need to leave your pad. Use the grips to bring up weapon selection in a touch menu. The pad clicks can make you crouch, sprint, or interact with the environment. Counter-Strike, on the other hand, is not something I'd recommend for anything other than casual play. Competitive matches shift the meta of the game into mid to long-range battles through the use of hard-to-master rifles. Spray control is made easier with the gyro, but it's still not quite enough to compete head-to-head against opponents who are using a keyboard and mouse. However, I would like to see someone start a new CSGO account with the Steam controller, and compare their earned rank to their main account. Surprisingly, RTS games are completely playable with the controller. I've been able to set up binds for unit orders, marquee selections, and quick building construction with a decent amount of accuracy. If you're a fan of RTS games and are willing to put in the work to set up a configuration that you're happy with, I think you'll be pleased at what the controller can accomplish. You won't notice an increase in APM, and you're not going to be climbing any online ladders with the Steam controller. But given the context of a $50 controller that you can take anywhere, I think the resulting performance is perfectly acceptable. Dark Souls 1 and action games that were built for a controller are a different story. The analog emulation is tough to talk about, as there are a ton of settings to cover. Valve has chosen the most versatile loadout as default, so it's really a mix of tweaking minor settings and just getting used to a new joystick to get the controller to play how you want. The best games to use with the controller can be split into two categories: top-down games and games that do not have an easy way of playing with the controller. Games like System Shock 2, XCOM, Civilization, Torchlight, these titles were designed to be used with the keyboard and mouse, but they all employ different touchpad settings, ranging from mouse to mouse region. Playing XCOM with the Steam controller, now that it's finally working, won't stress you out. Using the pad to control a cursor without needing the absolute speed and precision of a mouse enables you to focus on your game, instead of wishing you were playing on your desktop. Other alternatives are in place for you to bring the classic turn-based strategy to your living room, but unless you want to pay $180 for a glorified TV dinner tray, the Steam controller provides the best experience for less than a third of the price. That's really the key selling point here: the amount of features and versatility per dollar ratio. An Xbox controller will work for the handful of developer-supported games available, and of those games, only a few will actually play better on the controller. Driving games, action games, walking simulators, those will entice users to reach for their controller and kick back, versus sitting upright and tentative over a keyboard and mouse. The Steam controller is not going to magically increase your combo in Metal Gear Rising. It won't shave off seconds off that final lap in GTA. It won't make aerial goals any easier in Rocket League, but once you rage quit in XCOM after missing that 95% chance to hit, you can go play any of those games without picking up a new device. So that's my endorsement. It's a niche product that falls within a niche market. The Steam controller is for users who want to swing out of their chair and continue playing a game in their bed. It provides an excellent experience to control your browser out on your couch. It has minor problems in its user interface, which can potentially tarnish the user's overall experience. Sharing configurations can be a hassle, but the backbone for future improvements are already in place. These shortcomings place the Steam controller as the hardware equivalent of an early access title. It delivers on its premise of a jack-of-all-trades controller, but only if the user is patient enough to spend more than 10 minutes with it. Valve has shown that they are dedicated to consistent improvements to the software side through Steam beta updates, and will improve the reliability of the device through additional firmware updates. The last part of this video might sound a bit negative, but that shouldn't overshadow the numerous positives found from using this controller. The criticisms I've mentioned are honest, and in order for the controller to really excel, we need to be honest with ourselves.